play, all the more reason it was prized. It was basically, that was a rather crude sound, which gives you an idea of how the instrument sounded in its decline. At its height, it was described as, by Marseille, as from afar sounding as if a choice castrato, or a ray of sunshine piercing through a cloud. Now, so I mentioned that cornetti would play in ensembles, and while that was the treble cornetto, there was a cornettino, which is a soprano, which is pitched in D, that was in G. There are also tenors called Lizardin, they're curved slightly, and they're called lizards.
There are two pictures of a lizard on here. On the front, that second picture down, the lizard is in the middle on the bottom. You can see how it got the name lizard. It has kind of an S-curve shape to it. That arose because a very small cornetto will be in a straight line. But by the time you get to this size, you need it to be curved a little bit so that the fingers can actually reach the holes. By the time you get to the tenor size, you need to curve the instrument twice to reach the finger holes. And you can just imagine what the bass looks like, and in a minute you will fill your imagination with the actual picture of it. But in the meantime, the cornetto usually served as the soprano of the sackbut consort. Apparently the soprano sackbut was not all that much an acoustic success. So you see in the picture on the back of your sheet, the second picture down, you see a whole family of what look like different sized trombones. Those are the sackbuts, and they came generally in alto and tenor size, and also bass. So the typical church consort, as Patrick mentioned, was a cornetto on the soprano line, alto sackbut, tenor sackbut, bass sackbut. And now Patrick will tell you some more about his favorite instrument. He has, I think, 17 trombones.
Modern trombones.
And they all have names. The names all start with the letter A. It's just adorable.
In any case, so you may ask,
what are professors for if not to embarrass their students?
And so you may ask, what's so different about a sackbut from modern trombone? Well, I'll tell you. First off, the mouthpiece. The mouthpiece is more of a straight cup, and there is as much of a funnel as in a modern mouthpiece. Also, the rim is straight flat. There is no curvature to massage your lips and make it easier to play. It's a flat rim, and the mouthpiece does, in fact, affect the sound. Now, also, as you notice, the bell is much smaller. This means that the sound is more compact. It also means that high harmonics are actually better in tune than a modern trombone. On a modern trombone, in the standard harmonic series, certain notes are slightly out of tune. So the fifth, you have to tweak a little, and then if you want your seventh, which on the first position will be an A flat, it's so out of tune you have to move the slide almost half an inch. But on this instrument, it's in perfect tune because the bell is better suited to it. Yes?
So why didn't they keep the bell smaller?
Because you couldn't get as much volume. And as orchestras expanded, you need more volume to cut through to keep pace. So the trombone was actually, sackbut was largely a church instrument. You had a little bit of chamber work, but mostly they doubled voices. You'll see that in, for instance, Bach's fourth cantata, Christine Banden, in the 1711 revision. When he takes it out for a second time, he adds trombones on the alto, tenor, and bass parts, as well as cornetto and the soprano, which was an antiquated practice by his time. But even Mozart, in his Requiem, has alto, tenor, and bass trombones, doubling the alto, tenor, and bass voices in the choruses. So, let's get to the instrument. Ready? I'm going to hop back here a moment. Yes. protruding with a mouthpiece, but that only gives you one set of harmonics, a nice arpeggio, which doesn't help you play melodies, just send out fanfare to the army. So what they did was, they invented basically a telescoping trumpet, but that meant you had to go very far in order to move a whole step. So, being clever people, they bent that telescoping trumpet back on itself. You can move half the distance and get the same pitch change. That's the trombone was for. There's a point I wanted to make, but I slipped my mind.
Well, while you're thinking of it, Patrick mentioned that the mouthpiece for this is flat on the top, whereas in a modern brass instrument it's gently curved, much easier on the mouth actually. If you want to see a historical example of that from the Americas, get thee down to the fantastic archaeological excavations going on Jamestown Island now in Hampton Roads, where one of the 1 million early 17th century artifacts that they have pulled out of the ground at the site of the original Jamestown fort where the English landed in May of 1607 is a brass mouthpiece. They don't know if it's from a trumpet or a sackbut, quite possibly a trumpet, because we have 2 bits of written evidence that early group of Englishmen there had a trumpet. They had it on their ships to signal from one ship to the other. They also used it on land quite deliberately as a tool of intimidating diplomacy. When they went in state to go visit Chief Powhatan, they made sure their trumpeter went in front, blowing the whole time, because they had found that the Indians were just terrified of its sound. So to make themselves look big and terrifying, they marched with their trumpet in front. And a mouthpiece from the very earliest 17th century layer of excavations at Jamestown has been found. It's in the museum there on the site. So come on down to Williamsburg and then go 7 miles farther to the Jamestown excavations, go to the museum, and you'll see this brass mouthpiece. And indeed, its surface is absolutely flat, just like mouthpieces were known to have been at that time. But it caused a great deal of excitement in the historical brass circles in America because it was the earliest brass component found in the Americas.
So in any case, you heard that was actually a Renaissance air being played by the sackbut, and the sackbut was prized for its ability to emulate the human voice. That's the point I made the organ, which is why they were given to the church first amongst instruments. Now, people in the era prized the sound of a gently played sackbut, but it can be played brutally. So that's what a trumpet sound was, basically. And all the treatises of the time tell players do not sound like a brash trumpeter, or that is just foolish and buffoon-like, and to strive for a delicate, well-modulated tone. Now, speaking of tones that are not quite well-modulated, we have the bass member of the cornetto family. Strictly speaking, this is a late addition. It was invented by the French to accompany plain chant. Now, the thing with this instrument, it's called a serpent. You can guess why. It's a pain to play because any fingering you use, you can get about 10 different notes with hardly even trying, and only one of them is the note you want. Also, originally, like you recall that I started and we discussed earlier, the bass member of the cornetto family was actually relatively straight and it was kind of like a knobbly cane or a piece of diseased seaweed. But eventually they got some sense and made it easier to finger, hence the serpent. Now, do you want to tell the serpent story that why we're playing this particular piece?
Yeah, what Patrick's going to play is a melody that was specifically written at one point in history, written with the serpent in mind. The tune had existed for a very long time, but when Patrick played it, you'll recognize it either from church or from any grade B horror movie you've ever seen. But there's a famous piece of orchestral music that actually asked for the serpent to play this tune. And maybe after Patrick plays, we can do the little quiz and see who can guess what the piece was. Let's try that again. Sure, go ahead.
Dies irae, dies illa, solvet seclum in facila, teste David cum Sibylla.
When you hear that in the background of a horror movie, you know something really terrible is going to happen. Now, who knows the orchestral piece that called for the serpent specifically to play that tune?
Symphony Fantastique.
Symphony Fantastique. And that's because that piece was written in 1830. Berlioz wanted a big bass brass sound. The tuba was patented in 1835, so he had no choice but to use what there was. He called for one serpent and one ophicleide. The ophicleide had been invented in 1824 or something like that, or 1817.
Ophicleide is a key bugle. Basically, you take a trumpet and you cut some holes in it and put pads over it, kind of like a saxophone, and you get some slightly out of tune and difficult and not quite evenly sounding notes.
But when you think about how the Dies Irae functions in that final Witches' Sabbath movement of the Symphonie Fantastique, you see how peculiarly appropriate it is that in his mocking use of the Dies Irae, really scandalous for his time, you realize when people heard the Dies Irae was every single time they went to a Catholic funeral. And then Berlioz uses it in this very, what's the English word for profane way in Symphonie Fantastique. So to make it all the more profane, you have this instrument playing it called the serpent. You had a question.
How is the serpent made?
Well, this one is actually made of basically fiberglass. Because it's less expensive, unfortunately. You know, say